I would like to welcome our guests and our panelists. We have Parwana, I'm sorry about that, Parwana of the Environmental Equity Policy Fellow of the Greenlining Institute, Jose Bodipo-Memba, Sustainable Communities Director, and Brian Keane, President of SmartPower. And first, I'd like to welcome Jose Bodipo-Memba, Sustainable Communities Director of SMUD. Mr. Bodipo-Memba brings over 16 years of experience in managing and facilitating environmental and public outreach processes associated with CEQA and the National Environmental Protection Act compliance. Mr. Bodipo-Memba, his projects have covered a range of technical areas, including community development, specific plan development, infill development, school and facilities planning, historic research, site selection, and environmental justice. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let Jose Bodipo-Memba start sharing his presentation.
Thank you, Thomas. And again, I'm just going to wish you a happy belated birthday as well. Get started. Absolute pleasure. My name is Jose Bodipo-Memba, representing SMUD Sustainable Communities Initiative. And as Thomas mentioned, we're going to be talking a lot about maps. But I wanted to start here first in terms of what is SMUD and what is our Sustainable Communities Initiative. SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. We are the electric provider for Sacramento County. And our Sustainable Communities Initiative, really, the impetus was really about focusing on closing the disparity gap within our region. And so we feel by really focusing on 4 areas that you can see on your screen right now: social well-being, healthy environment, access to a prosperous economy, and access to mobility options. If communities have those 4 components, you can see some of the subcategories here on your screen, we believe we can really create equity. And in terms of looking at why that's important, as Thomas mentioned before, there's been a lot of planning decisions that have been made historically and decisions that are being made in the future that can impact that disparity gap. So one of the things that we try to do is take a look at the data that's available and identify areas where the highest degree of disparity might exist and figure out ways in which we can align our resources to close those gaps in those areas. So I'm happy to share with you, I came about and spoke with you guys about a year or so ago. We talked about this as a concept. I hope you guys can see it now. In reality, what we have is our Sustainable Communities Resource Priorities Map. And what we've really done is try to take a look at how we can take information about the communities that we serve to prioritize our infrastructure investments to make sure there's an equitable way of moving folks forward to meet the state climate change goals, to look at ways to invest from an innovation standpoint and the like. And I want to thank Leroy Turpet, who's on our team, who is one of the members of our innovation team here at SMUD and our small business team, our seed team, to really, one, helping lead that effort on a day-by-day basis. So what you see here with this map is really what it does is it gives us some hot spots, so to speak, where those resource needs are the highest. I'm going to kind of walk you through the map so you can see how it works. We use 8 primary categories to help us prioritize our investment areas and our areas of concern. One of those areas is the opportunity zone layers. And you can see here, this is an interactive map that's accessible to anybody here on the call. I'll put in the chat later, but if you go to www.smud.org/sustainable communities, it'll take you to the page. You drop down to the map link and you can get on it yourself and leverage this data. So this here has some information about the opportunity zone areas within the Sacramento region that we can actually take a look at. And by clicking on each of the census tract areas, it gives you a little bit of information on that opportunity zone area. Additionally, we use and leverage the Sacramento Promise Zone as a layer for evaluation as well. And again, the data can take you to the source documentation, and I'll use this as an example because we also looked at the SB 535 disadvantaged communities data as well. And we want to look at all this cumulatively because they are all interrelated. And so as I click on the link here, I can also find out specific information about each sensitive census tract area and find out information about the population characteristic rankings, as well as drinking water quality, groundwater threats, and what have you. So we're able to provide other specific data. If you want to go to the actual data source, you can just click here where it says disadvantaged communities, and it'll actually take you to the source documentation. So for anybody, it's kind of a one-stop shop to get an understanding of what triggers disparity within our region. So beyond the SB 535 disadvantaged communities component, we also evaluated the Sacramento poverty levels by zip code. So each of the zip codes you see highlighted here are zip codes that have at least 25% of the population living at or below the poverty level. So again, another key reason for us to focus our energy as this being an under-resourced area. Also include the HRSA underserved, medically underserved areas data. You can see here's the key concentration areas as defined. And if I want to find out some more information about what those triggers might be, I can click here on that link to the HRSA data, and it'll take me right to, again, all the specific information I might be looking for. And so I can actually take a look and find out information about low income, Medicaid eligible, homeless information. And so really the goal here is to consolidate a lot of existing data, but bring it together so that we all can use that information to really target some of those investment areas that we're looking at, the grant possibilities that exist, and expand the scope of what a disadvantaged community might be. Because as you guys saw with the disadvantaged map layer before, there's a lot of areas that we've identified cumulatively that don't fit into that map layer, but still require that additional investment to overcome some of the historic hardships that Thomas mentioned beforehand. So beyond the medically underserved areas, we also include the Healthy Sacramento Coalition health equity layer. We also include the vulnerability to climate change layer as provided by the state of California. And this is extremely important as well because it doesn't just take a look at climate change vulnerability from a risk standpoint, but also factors the risk in combination with social equity and in an overall poverty issue. The last key data layer that we've incorporated as a part of this analysis is the Cal EnviroScreen environmental justice layer. So again, what we really love about what the map that we've developed is that we've leveraged all of these data sets. Our friends at UC Davis helped in terms of doing some peer review of this analysis. But I gotta say the credit goes to the IT and GIS staff at SMUD for developing and creating this map. They've done an amazing job. And so what we've been able to do is take these 8 criteria areas as listed here, and then also added some additional overlays that you guys will see in a few minutes that you can actually use to better understand and define our region based off of risk and sensitivity level. So I know, for example, one of the things many folks here might be interested in is where are some opportunities for EV adoption where it may not exist. So we actually have our layer list here, which you guys can see I just pulled up. And on that, I can actually identify all of the public EV charger locations within our service area. And so they all are located here. One thing that you may notice is that those EV chargers are not located for the most part in these areas that have been defined as highest in sensitivity. So we can actually take a look at this data here and actually help prioritize where that future investment might be to ensure that it's truly equitable as opposed to going for the lowest hanging fruit or the areas where early adoption is most easy. And again, we aren't just using that data layer, but we're also taking a look at, well, what are some of the priority areas that have been identified within the region? So these EVSC priority areas, as defined by the city of Sacramento, is another layer that we added to help us in our integrated resource planning and EV allotment or allocation allotment. So we can actually identify while these are doing a decent job, there may be some key areas like here in Del Paso Heights, here in Fruit Ridge Manor, where there needs to be more significant investment. And then from an investment and grant standpoint, we have enough data here to actually create a really cohesive argument as to why some of these areas might be, again, a higher desired need for investment. And so what I'm gonna actually pull up here is, again, one of the key triggers we look at is air quality issues. And so I'll take a look at the CAP communities as defined by the air district, which are here in the blue, and I can now really have a conversation with our jurisdictions and say, guess what? In these key areas here that are most sensitive, there's no future planned EVs, there's no current EV charging opportunities. This is a place where we want to invest. And as you can see here, we also include school data. We include information related to light rail lines. As you zoom in closer, you can also get some more information as it relates to the free and reduced lunch rankings of each of the schools here. We have food desert information. The whole idea, again, is to provide as much data as possible for folks to better understand the needs and resources within our community so that we can right size our approach in terms of how we address, whether it be investment, whether it be, in SMUD's case, our investment of our public good dollars, to ensure that it's truly an equitable increase, particularly when we look at innovation. So what we've been able to do, and I'm going to unshare my screen real quickly, and I want to make sure to leave time for the other speakers, but what we've been able to do with this process is really leverage it as a means of actually taking a look at what partnerships that we need to actually establish within the community to ensure that we're really being truly equitable in the process. So I'll just show you guys just 2 more slides and then go back to the next speaker. But ultimately, we have, and again, here you can see the driving principles of the Sustainable Communities Initiative. But what we've done is taking that information from the map, help define our goals for the year, particularly given the increased risk in all those areas due to COVID, to make sure that we're really looking at short-term and long-term solutions. And with that process, we've been able to align on the ground with these nonprofits and establishing multi-year partnerships, including with the folks here on this call, to ensure that we're getting out at a community level to really look at innovative, not just stopgap measures, but really future forward investment measures that can really involve the entire community. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it when we get into the Q&A, but I wanted to just make sure that at least give you guys a highlight of some of the work that we've been doing.
Okay, great job, Jose. Thank you very much.
All right, and now I would like to welcome Parwana Ayub, who is currently an environmental and policy fellow working with Cal Seed companies at the Greenlining Institute, helping them grasp why social equity is important to technology growth. Parwana's passion for environmental justice has motivated her and is motivated by her personal history growing up in underserved communities in the Bay Area and abroad. Parwana understands that when it comes to addressing environmental issues equitably and inclusively, we must acknowledge their race and class dimensions. As a policy fellow, Parwana is looking forward to serving her community while learning about the policy landscape. So when you're ready, I will click onto the next slide.
Next slide, please. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Thomas, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Parwana, and I work at the Greenlining Institute as an environmental equity policy fellow. I just want to start by thanking CleanStart for inviting me, and for everyone here today for joining us for this conversation. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about a core tenet of our work at the Greenlining Institute, which is social equity. I'm going to talk about what social equity is, why it's important in the clean tech and clean energy industry overall, and why it should matter to you, to all of you that are here today. And then I'm going to end by providing an example of a clean energy grant program that we're trying to advance social equity in. Yeah, that's the plan. Next slide, please. So, but first, let me explain a little bit who Greenlining is. So the Greenlining Institute is a racial justice and economic justice public policy organization, and we're based in Oakland. Greenlining is actually a made-up word. It's, but it comes from the term redlining, which Thomas talked about a little bit in his opening. And redlining was the explicit and systemic government-sanctioned practice of excluding communities of color from economic opportunities in the 1930s with the New Deal. The map here on my slide on the left is a redlining map of the East Bay from the 1930s. As you can see, the areas marked in red were predominantly are where people of color live, particularly Black communities. And so those areas were considered high credit risks because of the presence of people of color there, and were marked off limits for federal investments. Although redlining is illegal today, you can still see the lingering impacts of redlining today. You can see it in the form of high poverty rates, degrading infrastructure, high energy costs, and so much more. So the other image, the two images here on this slide compare the East Bay redlining map from the 1930s with the current day CalEnviro screen map of the East Bay. The CalEnviro screen map, most of you might know, was created by a state agency here, and it identifies California communities that are most affected by sources of pollution and socioeconomic conditions. And the areas in red are the areas that suffer the worst from the worst pollution and are most socioeconomically disadvantaged. So if you compare the two maps, you'll see that the red and orange communities on the right suffer the most from the most poverty and pollution are the same communities that were redlined over 80 years ago. So not a lot has changed, unfortunately. And so at Greenlining, we work to overcome the negative impacts of redlining. We greenline communities by bringing in economic opportunities, investments, and green technologies to these communities. And in the environmental equity team, one of the issues we work on is to make the emerging clean energy economy inclusive and equitable, so everyone can have the access to the health and environmental benefits of clean energy. So in a nutshell, social equity is at the core of what we do at Greenlining across all of our work. Next slide, please. So why does equity matter, and what is it? Well, first, equity is not the same thing as equality. Equality is the assumption that the playing field is level, and so a one-size-fits-all solution is appropriate. Equity, on the other hand, acknowledges that people start from different places in life because of systemic injustices like redlining. And so for us at Greenlining, equity is about increasing access to power, redistributing resources, and eliminating barriers to opportunity and empowering marginalized groups to reach their full potential. The graphic here on the left illustrates this distinction. So in the context of the environment and the fossil fuel-based industry, social equity means acknowledging that when it comes to the fossil fuel-based economy, low-income communities of color bore the brunt of burdens while receiving little of the benefits. It means acknowledging that race, even more than class, is the #1 indicator where toxic and polluting facilities are located. They're mostly located predominantly in communities of color and low-income communities. It means acknowledging that climate change impacts hit low-income communities of color first and foremost. They're already facing economic, environmental, and health inequities due to past systemic injustices. Climate change impacts will exacerbate these pre-existing disparities. In other words, social equity really requires us to understand and acknowledge that the environmental and energy injustices we're seeing today didn't just happen by accident. They're very much the result of generations of discriminatory and racist policies and practices that have created these energy and environmental burdens for our communities. At the same time, while clean energy technologies could help improve environmental conditions, health conditions in these communities, green technology investments don't often reach the communities that need them the most. And there are a lot of reasons behind that, and hopefully we can talk about it in the conversation coming up. And the graphic here on the right just illustrates the fact that low-income communities pay a disproportionate percentage of their income toward energy costs compared to their more well-off neighbors. Next slide, please. Thanks. So for all of you here today tuned into this event, why does this all matter to you? Well, because you're all leaders in some capacity and advocates in creating a clean energy economy. And so you have the power to make sure that it's also equitable. We have to acknowledge that there are many differences among people and communities, from the resources they have to the conditions they live in. So I want to encourage all of you to think about how your work, wherever that may fall within the broader clean energy and clean technology industry, can be flexible, adaptable, and accessible to all communities. And also, I wanted to share that prioritizing social equity and bringing targeted benefits to underserved and low-income communities isn't just a focus of a small handful of organizations like Redlining. The state of California is very committed to seeing this happen across many different policies and programs. There are many different policies committed to advancing social equity. And for example, AB Assembly Bill 523, also known as the Equity and Clean Energy Investments Act, passed in 2017, requires that at least 35% of electric program investment charge must be used for clean energy projects in disadvantaged communities and low-income households. Also, Senate Bill 350 is another example, called the Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act. Takes steps to ensure that clean energy benefits are accessible to everyone, especially those in most vulnerable communities. And so, why am I sharing all this information with you? Well, like I mentioned before, because you're working in this industry, and so you have a role to play. And so all this information I've explained, it's very much kind of like the theory and the concept, but what does it actually look like in practice? Well, to talk about that, I'm gonna highlight CalSeed as an example of a program that Greenlining has been partnered with for the last 4 years to advance social equity. CalSeed is a California Sustainable Energy Entrepreneur Development Initiative from the California Energy Commission. And it funds clean energy innovations, early stage clean energy innovations with social impact, and helps to bring these ideas to market. And our role at Greenlining is to make sure that social equity is integral to this grant program. And to advance social equity in CalSeed, we've developed a two-pronged strategy. The first part is about bringing equity into the program. So in practice, that means focusing on how we do outreach to make sure that all communities know about this program and are applying for it, because we want to bring the most diverse group of applicants from all types of communities and encourage them to apply to CalSeed. Because when we think about early stage clean energy innovations, it's the hardest type of innovation to really get off the ground because it's such high risk. And so the capital to really get that money put into the research is really hard to come by. So we see CalSeed as a great opportunity for entrepreneurs who have great ideas but maybe lack the upfront capital, so social networks, or even significant experience in the tech world to use this money to bring their ideas into reality. And the second part of our equity strategy for CalSeed is to work with the entrepreneurs once they receive the grant to make sure that they have a solid grasp of what social equity is and how they can begin to put social equity into the foundation of their ideas and products and companies. And so I wanted to share CalSeed as an example of a program that could be replicated elsewhere in other industries. So it's just one example, and I'm happy to get more into it in the conversation later on. So I want to leave you with some questions to reflect on how you can make social equity a part of your work, and it starts with the 4 W's. First of all, why is social equity important to you personally and maybe professionally in your work, in your company? What type of social impact you would like to create? Who are you creating social impact for? Specificity is key here, trying to name exactly which groups, which communities you're trying to create benefits and opportunities for. And then lastly, where will this social impact, social equity take place? Maybe if you're an entrepreneur or a startup internally within your company processes, or externally with how you design your products, how you market your products, to make sure that you're asking yourself, well, who's not being reached with the approach that we have? So thank you for tuning in and for working to ensure equitable clean energy economy for everyone in California. And thank you for listening. I'll be here, I'll stick around here for the conversation after.
Okay, thanks so much, Parwana. Great job.
Thank you very much. All right. Next, I would like to welcome Brian Keane, President of SmartPower. Brian Keane is an executive leader with extensive experience in grassroots and digital organization. Since 2002, he has served as the founder and president of SmartPower, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit renewable energy and efficiency outreach and marketing company. Keane has been credited with driving the adoption of over 100 million in rooftop residential solar in just 3 years, creating tens of thousands of solar energy and energy efficiency customers.
And thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Gary. So my name is Brian Keane, and I run an organization called SmartPower. And I'll just jump right into it. We've been around for almost 20 years as a nonprofit marketing firm on clean energy and energy efficiency. So our job has really been to get people to buy clean energy and to be energy efficient. And we sell it the way McDonald's sells hamburgers, the way Coca-Cola sells Coca-Cola. Really, what we want to do is get people to buy solar power, to buy wind power, to buy large-scale solar, to be energy efficient for the reasons they want to do it, not really the reasons that we would like them to do it. Across the country, we know that people don't necessarily buy into climate change or the reasons that we would like people to be energy efficient, to buy solar power or to buy renewable energy. But in fact, there are reasons why they would want to do it themselves. And so that's what we try to do. We get the messages and we get the means for them to do it. And then actually they will do it. So that's what we try to do. And that is good marketing. And over the years, we've had a massive number of clients and programs that actually focus on those programs and those communities that do it. Specifically, what we've really learned is the on-the-ground outreach, the community by community, the peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend, neighbor-to-neighbor approach is actually what drives people to make an energy action. And so what I want to talk about tonight is really what's driven kind of so much of our work, which is what we call Solarize. And that is where people actually are buying solar power for their homes and actually for their communities. Solarize has been really a dramatic program, and this actually is this slide here actually is of the state of Connecticut. And in this presentation, it would actually be it should be a video that would actually show the growth of solar across the state of Connecticut. But what it actually does is shows how from peer to peer, from friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor, person to person, people will buy solar. The way people buy solar power today is because their friends and neighbors are buying solar. It is as basic as the fact that your next door neighbor has bought solar power or somebody at work has bought solar power. The way we do it today, the way we buy solar today is because our neighbor bought it. That's how it works. It's peer pressure. And so our campaigns, our on-the-ground outreach campaigns, are just predicated on that. It's really not very technological until we actually started using technology to do it. So as SmartPower is a not-for-profit organization, but then we actually wound up creating a for-profit technology piece to actually help us do this in a socially distant way, but also so that communities and companies and organizations could create their own solarized campaigns. And that's what is really driving the cost of the solar campaigns today, that organizations and entities can actually now run their own solarized campaigns and get their friends and neighbors to buy solar. And if you think about it, the way it really works, and think about it just today, when you are marketed to, the way, and especially during COVID, by the way, we are buying and engaging in products because more likely our friends and neighbors have talked to us about them, especially when you think about Netflix or Amazon Prime. You are watching shows because people you know have suggested them to them. We are marketed to constantly. So if your friends or neighbors have solar or energy efficiency products, you're more likely to buy them. And so that's what's really driving this. Forever now, we have been told that wealthy people will buy solar, but low to moderate income people will not. And we at SmartPower have actually maintained that that's really not true, but we needed to prove it. That we have actually believed that in fact, people will buy solar because they want solar. They think solar is actually part of their lifestyle. It can actually help their lifestyle, but that there were certain barriers that were there that were preventing them to get it. And so what we needed to do is to actually figure out and prove that in fact, there are ways and messages to get them to buy it. So we actually set out on an LMI, a low to moderate income campaign to actually show how they could get it and why they would want to get it. And that's really what I want to talk about today is our LMI campaigns that were really quite groundbreaking. The cost of solar is dropping. And that's significant because if you're low to moderate income, you're on a fixed income to some extent. And that's a real key point to buying solar. After all, solar is somewhat of a luxury because when you live in a home, you live in an apartment, energy, if you will, comes with the property, right? You're already plugged in, you're attached to the grid, so it's already there. Why it's not on your top 10 list of things you need, solar is not there. And so that's why solar focuses on wealthy communities. It's an add-on. But if there's gonna be a solar revolution, we actually just can't have wealthy people buy it. We need everybody to buy it. We need everyone to get it. And so that's why LMI has been such the holy grail. For these campaigns, we actually use the We Green platform. And the We Green platform actually allows us to, or allows everybody to actually implement solarized campaigns from their desktop, from their phones, in communities wherever they are. And that's what's really exciting about We Green. So it is in fact solarized in a box, and it can be socially distant, especially during these COVID times. It actually is also attached to a fully integrated marketplace so that we know when people say, hey, I want to buy solar, 80% of them don't buy solar, but they then can have the option and the opportunity to buy everything else. They could buy a light bulb, they could buy a thermostat, they could buy organic food, they could buy clothing, they could buy anything they want. And so they can actually then go through the food chain of sustainability, as we say, and ultimately maybe someday actually buy solar power. So for this exercise, we ran 19 solarized campaigns and actually then 10 control groups as well. These campaigns were run in South Carolina, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And I should really point out, by the way, that they were measured and verified by Yale University, New York University, and implemented by us, SmartPower, and funded by the US Department of Energy. So this was really a massive effort to figure out how and what motivates LMI communities to buy solar. First and foremost, it's a messaging effort. So what, by the way, is the messaging different in LMI communities than say in wealthy communities? So we tested that message, and if you understand kind of how people respond to messaging, you know, it's kind of like, hey, there are two kind of tracks. Is it good for the community or is it good for the individual? So let's actually take the individual first, and that's that kind of smaller box. But a lot of times when you're selling solar power, you would talk about how it's good for you. It'll save you money. It just makes sense for you and your family. It'll reduce your reliance on the grid. It'll actually lead to lower prices for you, and you know, it's how much it saves you and makes you look good. Those are the individual messages. So we use those messages for some of these campaigns. And then there's kind of the community messages, kind of more altruistic messages. My city and my town could be a leader in solar energy. The community is doing something together. All of my friends and my neighbors are doing this too. You kind of make this bigger than just myself. And so we tested these messages in all these different campaigns and to targeted different homes. And that's kind of, it's important to kind of just keep this in mind as I walk through this, that these community and these individual messages were being tested. And so here are really the key findings. That in fact, generally and really importantly, solarized programs work in LMI communities, period, highlight, stop, full stop. Households, they will buy solar. They'll buy rooftop solar, they will buy community solar. And that's really a big breakthrough, actually, that the assumptions that low to moderate income communities and households, that they would not or could not buy solar is not true. They will and they want to. By the way, the concept of zero down loans is really important to low to moderate income communities, but it is as important to them as it is to wealthy communities, that it becomes a simple issue of affordability. Can I afford a monthly payment? And will that monthly payment actually add value to my household? And a zero down loan sure does. But more importantly, is this concept that trust matters. I need to know who I'm getting this from. And that is this concept of peer-to-peer outreach, the local solar ambassadors. Who am I buying this from? And this is true really from the first day we started Solarize campaigns, almost now 12 years ago, that there is no Coca-Cola brand name in solar. So when you buy solar, you're really buying it based off the fact that your friend or your neighbor says, hey, yeah, I got solar. And the company that put it on, you should use them. They're really good. And so you basically use it, you buy it based on your friends or neighbors, your social circle who have also done it, and it really counts. And as I said, by the way, it's really important to remove the key barriers. This concept of financing options becomes extremely important for LMI, but also for everybody. And so the solar loans become a big deal. Community solar options are also really important. Community solar, which is, by the way, is SmartPower. We've done a lot of community solar campaigns. And the opportunity for LMI communities to buy into community solar becomes a big deal. Community solar, as you may know, is different than rooftop solar. It is the opportunity for people who live in apartments to actually buy into a neighborhood, say, solar array. And that's a big deal because people want to be part of their community and do something. Delivering the message, getting the word out is as important as well. Adopting solar, you need to get it out through your friends and neighbors, and it becomes an individual message, and that becomes really important. And so that it's as important in LMI communities as it is in wealthy communities. The most interesting finding in all of this LMI work is that the messages between the individual messages of, you know, this is good for you and it saves your home money, and the community messages, they actually rate the same. So there's the same level of adoption of solar between LMI communities and wealthy communities. But people in LMI communities who were delivered the community-based messaging, that is the messages that say, you know, we're going to do this because this is going to make my community a better community. When we went back and, you know, polled them and did surveys of, you know, how did you like your solar? They actually were happier, quote unquote, happier with their solar than those who bought solar based on their individual messages that they received. And then they became better advocates for their friends and neighbors to actually buy solar. So it's a very nuanced message, but if you want more people to buy solar, which we do, presumably most people on this call do, if we want more people to buy solar and more low to moderate income communities to buy solar, the strongest messaging we should be giving is the community-based messaging, that we should be buying solar. You should be buying solar because it's better for our community. And our community will be better tomorrow and next year and the year after that because we're all buying solar. And it's very fascinating. It's fascinating. And yet both messages worked, and they worked equally well, and they work equally well in low to moderate income communities and wealthy communities. But the community message makes people happier with their purchase. And if you think about when you're happy with your purchase, you actually just brag about it more, you're happy about it, you tell more people about it, and then more people buy more. And so that becomes a real motivator. And this is, I dare say, this is a big breakthrough in LMI research and LMI marketing of solar, because in 5 to 10 years, we may well see a big uptick in residential and community solar in low to moderate income communities because of this. Because if people are feeling happier about their solar, they will tell others, and we will now have more solar in low to moderate income communities. And that's a big get. In 2016, South Carolina had 591 megawatts of solar. Our campaign reached over 7,000 homeowners, 9 signed contracts for rooftop solar, 130. Doesn't sound like a lot, but those are big numbers actually in community solar and big numbers in rooftop. So these are really breaking numbers, and that's a big deal. And they were happy about their solar. But the takeaway from this talk is to get this copy of this guidebook from this research. SmartPower, Yale, and NYU, we created this guidebook. And if you go to this website, and Thomas, I'm assuming we can get this presentation to these folks, go to this website, download our guidebook here, and you can obviously read the guidebook, but also create your own campaign and actually get people to buy solar and call us. We can help you create your own campaign and get people to buy solar. It's really important that people in every single community are actually part of this solution, not just wealthy communities. In fact, I could even go on further, but wealthy communities to some extent are even more difficult than LMI communities in getting solar. So, be part of the solution, but help everybody get solar. And we can actually really make a solar revolution happen here in the United States. So that's my piece. And thank you very much for having me.
Okay, that's great, Brian. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the panelists. We're going to go to a discussion format now. And there are some questions that have been coming in on chat. As people think of questions, do put them into chat. Sometimes a lot of people have the same question in mind. So this just helps us organize it. And I'll ask for Thomas to help us make sure we're getting those questions answered. But let me begin a discussion here. And my first question is to all of the panelists. I'm going to start with Brian. But, describe what you think is your best success in what you've been doing so far in the underserved communities. Particularly, something that's dealt with a business, some kind of market opportunity out there. But Brian, you're obviously very close to that in the presentation you've just made. And maybe amplify a little bit on solarized campaigns and the community benefits here. One, as I'm picking up, for companies that are in the solar business, aggregating a larger set of customers makes the deal easier for them to install, finance, they spread the risk. But also, I think in some of the solarized campaigns, you've worked with the local utility to use their incentive budgets that they would ordinarily put to this. And maybe instead of giving each individual homeowner an incentive, you could say, no, we're going to put more playground equipment in the local park. We're going to clean up the local park and we'll put a solar shade structure up, or you're going to do something in a parking lot, or something that community people can relate to, that it improves the community overall. So can you relate to
I think
how solarize, what the business opportunity is?
So I think you hit on it exactly, Gary, because that's what this research is leading to, which is the fact that if, in fact, the community message is the stronger message and makes people happier, that's really where, specifically say, utility solar programs, whether it's a community solar or residential solar that utilities are doing, they should actually focus on rewards and incentives for the community. So it is kind of like, hey, if we can do, and SmartPower, we do a lot of these kind of campaigns, and it's kind of like, hey, if we can get 100 residents in this community to sign on for a community solar program or a rooftop solar program, if we get 100 of them, then the utility will create a playground for this community, or a donation to the Boys and Girls Club. That actually feeds upon itself. That's exactly kind of the play it needs, because it's fascinating that you see this interplay of, well, I'm doing something good for myself, but it's also good for the community. And what you realize, and underneath that research, by the way, we saw this a long time ago too, is that so many of these LMI communities, they are you have these inner city communities that, by the way, have had, they have the worst buses in the system, right? So they have the polluting buses. So they have the asthma problems. They're dealing with these environmental problems their entire lives. And so they're kind of like, look, we're going to fix this. And so I'm going to get solar because not only does it help me, but it's actually going to be an offset for the buses that we have trundling through these streets. And so they're actually helping each other. And if a incentive program actually helps that community, that's much more important. I'd also say, by the way, and we did this actually in this program too, one of the utilities that we were working with there was a control group. One of the utilities the utilities were part of this. There was a control of in one of the communities. They said, we're going to sell more. We think we can sell more solar our way than your way. And we said, fine, it's not a competition, but let's just see which is better. And they offered $1,000 cash for every solar system sold. And we were doing, our peer-to-peer outreach, believing, and we still believe, that in fact people will buy it based on their friends and neighbors. The $1,000 cash did nothing to move the needle. In fact, we were still selling 2 times the amount of solar that they did. And it is because the money doesn't move the needle. It's about actually who you trust to actually get you to take this energy action. So the utilities should actually save their $1,000 per individual and then say, we're going to take that money, pool it, and use it to actually help the community. Putting in charging stations would really be a huge deal. Jose, your map was unbelievable, showing like, boy, here are these whole communities that are like deserts. There's no charging stations. There's no solar. There's no community solar. There's no, like, imagine just going in there and putting an entire kind of ecosystem of solar and charging stations and solar loans, and bringing in, by the way, the solar loan companies, incentivizing the solar loan companies to be in there. Like, how unbelievable that would be for some of these communities. And they're everywhere in the country. And the solar loans, by the way, and if I can keep going on for a second, the solar loans are unbelievable because you go to a place like South Carolina, and so many of these homes, they're beautiful homes, they're unbelievable homes. And when we talk about LMI, by the way, we're not talking about homeless people. We're talking about people, they have jobs, that they live in homes, they're not destitute, right? So, but they are living paycheck to paycheck. They're just regular people. But they're not wasting money, and they have a home, but there is not enough equity in that home for some of these solar loan companies to actually take the risk. So many of these solar loan companies are venture backed. And so they will not take any risk on some of these customers. And that's really, it to some extent, it smells a little bit like the redlining that we were talking about earlier. You can smell it. It's like, oh, it's so high, it's so venture backed. It has to be, a 780 a credit score before they'll do anything. And so it's like, well, and then there's no equity in the house. And so they just won't do it. And so it kind of cuts out too many people. And yet they got great roof, they got a lot of roof, and they got great jobs. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that everybody can actually get some of these loans. And we've talked to banks to actually help that. So there's a lot of steps that we could do and take. And I think the utilities in some of these communities could be part of that, actually, with just kind of creating funds to help that.
Hey, Gary, I was hoping to jump in real quickly. Your initial question, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
In terms of what are some of the other things that we can do in that space, or what are we proud of? What are some things that we're doing that we're proud of? I mean, I think one of the things that you guys saw in the map that we shared is, as Brian's talked about and Parwana talked about, there's the indicators that trigger the disparity. While there's an environmental component, there's an economic component as well, and transportation component as well. They're all interconnected. And so I think trying to tie the innovation to job access and to careers has been something that we've been trying to drive towards. So, for example, what's exciting right now is SMUD has been one of the primary funders for the California Mobility Center. And as a part of that California Mobility Center, we're looking at innovative green transportation opportunities that are really going to be centered. And we actually leverage this map to identify the headquarters for this CMC structure. So it's going to be located in the Power In area. So right now, as we speak, we're offering for folks who are displaced by COVID-19, paid training opportunities for careers in that space. So again, we're trying to make this an economic driver, but also introducing folks to these new innovative technologies and spaces. So we have training classes happening at the Urban League, at the Asian Resources, at La Familia. We're partnering right now with the California Conservation Corps. They're building out a EV training center over at their location in South Natomas and off of Richards Boulevard. And again, we're excited with that space. We've been able to provide some funding to help with that. But what's going to be great is they're going to be able to take folks from these same communities, provide them with paid training and jobs in the E spaces. And we'll be able to have more and more qualified candidates for these burgeoning innovation spaces in the Sacramento region. Those are just a couple. Brian talked about solar. Again, we launched our solar training class with the Urban League in the spring, and we're going to be actually putting up some shade structures at some key locations in underserved communities that will be used for beautification, obviously solar energy, but also education in spaces where young people can find out, wow, this is what, this solar shade structure is equal to so and so many trees. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the importance of the heat island effect component in our underserved communities and the work we're doing with the Tree Foundation and leveraging, again, one of the layers I didn't show you on the map is we actually have a tree canopy map as well. And it's scary to see where tree canopy exists versus our underserved communities. It's almost a one-to-one. Where you see red, you see no trees. Where you see green, you see lots of trees. So we're trying to take advantage of that data to make sure that we're going in with community members and doing key planning. So our friends at Mutual Housing are actually doing, one, they were early adopters in terms of having the EV car share at their apartment locations. Now they're looking at community solar opportunities that, community tree planting opportunities that hadn't been done before. So I think there's lots of opportunities to take these innovative opportunities to train folks in these spaces and put folks to work. Because as our region, as a state capital, we know we're going to be leading in this area. So we've got to make sure that our underserved communities are aware of that value. The last piece I'll say is, to Brian's point about education and understanding the value. If folks realize that their air quality can be impacted in a positive way by getting out of a gas powered vehicle and into an EV, and there's opportunities for EVs at low income, and programs like Clean Cars for All and others can help transition that makes a huge difference. And then lastly, we're working with the school districts. We're working with the folks in Del Paso Heights at Grant High School. We've actually installed a number of electric buses, and we're not just using those buses, hopefully when school comes back, but also providing opportunities for students to learn how to fix those buses so they can be a part of the EV mechanic space, which is going to be a whole new level of education. So I don't want to talk too much because I know Parwana has some questions in the chat, but I wanted to at least make sure that component was discussed, because the reality is if we don't address those economic concerns in combination with the environmental concerns, then we're not really addressing the whole issue. I think that's something key for us.
I think that's totally key. And Brian sort of laid out a possibility there, and just continue with you, Jose. Would SMUD be open to taking the kind of community organizing effort and applying existing incentives and subsidies in creative ways to make this a community effort to do a number of things? It might be solar plus electric charging plus some of the things that you mentioned. Is that worth exploring?
Again, I think SMUD is actively working with community members to look at a variety of different ways to find solutions. Again, we're trying to meet those 2040 goals for the state of California. We're trying to make sure that we are a part of the green revolution. But I think what we want to make sure is done in an equitable way that takes into account the financial impacts on our most underserved communities, and as well as takes advantage of programs like our community solar program and others. So we're trying to be creative in that space. I think that hearing from the community is key for us. We are a community-run organization. And we've had a number of conversations with folks on every aspect of that conversation. So folks who are really locked in on the environmental side to folks who are really locked in on the social equity side. We're trying to find that middle ground, and it's just gonna be a lot of listening, a lot of working, a lot of trial and error. But I think we're open for any solution that works for all of our customers.
Great. Well, let me move on to Parwana. I got a question here from Waverly. What does Greenlining see as the biggest barriers to getting community members in red line districts active and initiating change in their neighborhoods? And, you know, I would add to that, do you have some success stories with what you're doing in Cal Seed or others to relate to us as to sort of pointing a direction of the future as to what we can expand on? Opening opportunities to our CleanTech startups, our small businesses in the area to get involved. What's been your experience, and what can you offer there, Parwana?
Okay, I can, yeah, I mean, that's a really big and loaded question, saying what barriers are there? Well, there are a lot of barriers, but I think when it comes to like talking about public funding, public programs, just because funding is available doesn't mean that communities necessarily have the expertise, the technical know-how to first apply for that funding, or if they can apply for it, to use that effectively. So one of the ways Greenlining works with communities is we partner with a few different communities. So Stockton, East Palo Alto, we work with the local government to help them essentially apply for funding. And then once they get funding, we work with them to make sure that they have the capacity to use that funding the way they want. And I think when it comes to actually kind of getting the community involved, that's a huge cornerstone of the environmental justice movement, the right to self-determination, of figuring out what you need and figuring out what the needs are, but doing that in a way that's very democratic and that everyone in the community has a say and can voice their concerns. So I think one of the big challenges is like doing effective and equitable outreach. Like, how do you create community events or meetings where everyone that has 9-to-5 jobs and has a million other priorities to like actually make time for that and attend and voice their concern? I think Oakland has been doing a good job with their model of how they're conducting community outreach with the Oakland Climate Coalition. I've attended some of their meetings. Like that's one model I could offer of like doing comprehensive and equitable outreach. That's they have their events in public locations like public libraries and community centers to make sure that everyone has a way to get to the planning meetings. And I think, I mean, yeah, but I think in terms of kind of, and one of the reasons I ended up at Greenlining was because I was working at Great Alternatives, and I was working as an outreach coordinator, helping low-income communities get access to solar. And I think going back to kind of what Brian was talking about like the challenges of getting solar to take off in low middle income communities, from what I saw when trying to get families and individuals access to solar, the challenges are so different. First of all, if you're like low income, there's very like that in itself, there's like a very smaller, I mean, there aren't that many low income families that like are homeowners, right? So that's like cuts off a lot of people. And the other part, there's like a lot of structural challenges. So a lot of the time, low income families that do own homes and qualify for no cost solar from places like Grid, it's like the reality is they might have really old roofs that need to be redone, or they might have really outdated main service panels that need to be updated before they can even like be solar suitable. So I think in terms of kind of addressing the needs of low-income communities and making sure solar like reaches those communities, we also have to think about those really like important infrastructural barriers. Yeah, I don't know, I'm a little bit rambling, but yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
Okay, so coming back to Brian, could you elaborate a little bit on how you get started in a Solarize campaign and organize these things? And then how do you deal with some of the suspicion of the solar installers in LMI communities that they're going to get scammed? And I know you've addressed both of those in the programs that have been out there. So what's like the first element in a Solarize campaign and organizing a community and making sure that there is going to be a good community outcome here?
Absolutely.
And the trust in the solar installer is high. Could you comment on that, Brian?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges a consumer has, from the consumer point of view, is that, you know, if you want solar for your house, you could ask 10 solar installers and you get 10 different prices. And it doesn't make any sense from their point of view because it's the same size roof. So why am I getting 10 different prices? And then you have the added conflict or issue of, so I give you my down payment and then they just run away. So there are a lot of challenges for the consumer. So the way we handle it is, and by the way, what we know is just as Americans, we can't handle that many choices, right? So there's Burger King and there's McDonald's, there's Coke, there's Pepsi. We can't handle too many choices. So we do it as an RFP process before the campaign starts. So we'll go into our community and we'll say, we're going to run a Solarize campaign. We know from our research and from practice that a campaign needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's got to have an end. For too long, solar campaigns, solar environmental organizations, even ourselves, we've let these things go on forever. But if you don't end it, nobody actually buys anything. Which is, by the way, why, you know, stores have sales. You got to end it. So we end them, and the best time to have these sales is basically about between 16 and 20 weeks. So we say, hey, we're going to run a Solarize campaign, and we are looking for one solar installer to be our solar installer for that 16 to 20 weeks. So give us your best offer. And we then work with the local community. And by the way, most communities, most organizations will have kind of a green team. They'll have experts, and we ourselves consider ourselves experts too, to work with the local organization to review these RFPs. And it's a very simple RFP for the installers who don't have a lot of time themselves. But we look at the pricing, we look at kind of their capacity, and their length of time in the community to do this. And we're able to basically very quickly weed out the scammers. And it's really kind of cool. By the way, you sit with the local folks, and they also don't just look at pricing. They actually, fascinatingly, will say, we more or less want to go with the local people because we want to be able to find where these people live. We want to make sure that we can actually get them if something goes wrong with this system. And so you really kind of wind up with really the best installer. And it's really kind of cool. You can say, hey, this is the installer that actually has installed, 70% of the installations in the community, and that they can have the capacity to do it. And the other installers that didn't get picked for that campaign are actually okay with it as long as they know there's going to be another campaign that follows up on it. And there will be, because each Solarize campaign is successful. So they always know, like, hey, in one, 16 or 20 week campaign, they actually will make their entire year's goal for themselves of solar installations. So it really kind of works. It's really amazing. So it's a really key piece to kind of get these solar installers. And it's, you're really kind of not, we had this huge issue, by the way, when we first started, because a lot of these kind of solar installers were trying to be part of it. And very quickly, they went away, and actually they even went out of state. Like it was unbelievable. They just kind of left. So it really worked amazing well. The other thing that's fascinating is that American consumers will say, we want competition in the marketplace. So they want competition. We all want competition. The RFP process is competition. It's just at the beginning of the sale. So it actually allows for competition. It just is at the front of it, so that it then removes the confusion for the consumer. And at this stage of the solar marketplace, you have to remove that confusion, because there is just so much. When you're buying solar and you try to explain to a homeowner, well, this is your solar, but what type of inverter do you want? And by the way, it's connected in this way. And that's why my system is going to be twice as much as, Joe's system that he talked to you about yesterday. You've already lost the sale and nothing happens. And so it's really just important that we limit the number of installers within these campaigns, but we want competition, so we do it at the front end. And it really works. It works beautifully.
Well, you've raised another thing too, and Parwana had the whole comment about what if you're dealing with homes that are not in that great a condition. The roof may need to be replaced first. The service panel is not up to speed. But you've mentioned community solar as a way to do a solar campaign too. Now in SMUD, they have the Solar Shares program. So there is a community solar approach to that. Have you ever done a solarized campaign that was heavily into the community solar rather than the rooftop solar?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great. I mean, it works as effectively. The challenge we have with community solar is that there's not a uniformity among community solar campaigns, and that they literally can change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So some are run by utilities, some are run by the states, some are run by the municipality. So they really can get very confusing. Some are sold. Some must be sold before they're built. Some are built before they're sold. Some, so they get really confused. We did one in Minnesota that was so difficult because the utility needed it to be sold out before it was built. And part of it was you couldn't, it was, once you bought into it, you couldn't get out of it. And the concept of community solar to some extent is like, well, it's great if you're in an apartment, but by the way, I may move out of my apartment. So can't I leave this to the next person who's going to get this apartment? Because I don't want to take this to my house, like that type of thing. I might get rooftop solar in my house. Like there should be some incentive to and it was very complicated to get out of it or transfer it to the next tenant of the apartment is what I'm saying. And so there were like a lot of confusions with it. And what we've been advocating for a lot is uniformity of community solar. And I think that would be a big get. And part of that also is we talk about the communications of community solar because part of what people will say to us just in our on-the-ground outreach campaigns, like, oh, so you guys do community solar? And it's like, well, we think we do because we're in the community talking about solar, but that's not what people think of as community solar, or the industry thinks of as community solar. So there's just some of the nomenclature that we need to really kind of tighten up.
Peter Mackin has put in a good comment here about SDG&E having a lower cost adapter for a panel, probably a side panel, to avoid the cost of having to upgrade everything. So people should look there for that link. And to come back to Jose, the SMUD Solar Shares program, I didn't look at it in detail to know, do you buy into that in perpetuity, or do you buy shares that are like 5 or 10 years limited on that? Do you happen to know how the SMUD program contributes in this? Because that's been a good initiative at SMUD as well.
Definitely. In terms of the solar shares question, in terms of the purchase process, and actually we're updating and upgrading even more options for community solar, but it's not in perpetuity. It's something that is paid over a period of time. And it has been pretty successful in terms of the buy-in from our customers. There's a number of customers have been engaged, and the demand for community solar is really driving us towards looking at other community solar options that some of which will be actually sharing with the public in 2021. So again, I think we're trying to be creative in that space. And I think that's a direction that that this SMUD wants to go. And I guess just in a quick question, I see Bettina had a question in terms of other examples of clean technologies that are maybe less obvious that we've leveraged some of the map information. I think the area that we're probably proudest of, Bettina, is some of the work we've done on the indoor air quality side, is leveraging some of the air quality data that we've gathered in combination with some of our low income and other under-resourced information, and actually leveraging some of the local groups that provide indoor air quality testing that allow for our teams to actually provide upgrades internally to improve indoor air quality for our customers. We've been leveraging the EEI group at UC Davis to help with that process. Started with some sample neighborhoods based off of the work that we've done with the mapping, and we're looking to expand that. So again, I think there's opportunities to leverage the data to come up with a number of different clean technology solutions that are out there. Again, for us, it's trying to leverage what we have and what we have access to share with public members like yourselves and give you space to be innovative and creative. And the cool part about the map itself is that it is all publicly available information. So we aren't providing any proprietary info for customers, but it can give you an idea geographically and as you zoom in as to concentration areas we can find opportunities. I see the last piece too is that the opportunity zone overlay can also provide folks who are looking at long-term investment in innovation spaces with the tax benefits to do so. But again, looking at the equity lens of including and incorporating into what Brian said, leveraging those community partners so that it is done at grassroots level. I mean, I think that's one thing that all of us agree as panelists is any momentum in any of these spaces require that word of mouth and that trust. And I think that the one thing that SMUD's try to do is really build that trust level, not just directly through our relationship with the community, which we're really proud of over the last 75 years, but also with those community partners and nonprofits that do that work on a day-to-day basis. So I think that we have a real good head start in many cases in reaching out to some of these under-resourced communities and drawing that connection as to why should you trust SMUD in this walk? Because we've had a good relationship with you over the last 75 plus years. So hopefully that answers Gary's question and also Bettina's question as well.
Yeah, so a couple questions on here about how small businesses need to get engaged with SMUD, and SMUD's been very open about a wide open process on RFPs and other things like that. But what about the unsolicited ideas? Where would some people connect if they say, hey, I got this interesting idea on how to connect and put a lot of things together, solar, indoor air quality, electric vehicle charging in an underserved community? Is the connection you, or where would you get a conversation started if you were a small business?
If you're a small business and you have an idea, if you go on our sustainable community site, there's actually a link at the bottom that will allow you to reach out and connect to us. I'll put my contact information. And the cool thing about SMUD, again, Leroy Trepet is here on the line with our small business group. They take in those ideas as well. We're looking for innovation leaders from the community. So I'd say go ahead, shoot me an email, shoot us a note at the website, tell us about what your interests are. We'll look for that alignment. I think some of the ideas that we've gotten in terms of, or that we've received in terms of how to partner have come from community members. Gina Lujan is a great example of someone who's reached out and said, here's a great way for us to leverage what we're doing at our organization with another organization to reach more people. Gina's group actually extended out to one of our underserved daycare communities to really introduce some of those parents and that the opportunities that her organization puts forward. So I'd say bring those ideas, share them with us, and we're open to collaborating with community members. And I go right to the website, smud.org/sustainable communities, and there's a look to partner link. Shoot us information when we can talk about partnering.
All right, well, that's very helpful, and I'm sure people will find it very encouraging that we can make a direct contact like that. And Parwana, the question here, you talked about your cow seed initiative. I see on some of the cow seed wins that people have said they'll make their manufacturing facilities established in an underserved area. What are some of the other wins that you've tried to steer people to in your cow seed program at Greenlining?
So I think so the way CalSeed kind of, when folks apply for this grant program, the way we screen for social equity is that we've created specific categories of social impact areas. So there's creating economic opportunities like hiring locally, contract procurement, but there's also newer areas that are kind of like more relevant now. So like things like grid resilience, because when we think about low-income communities and communities of color, they're more vulnerable to power outages. So that was a category we added this year, a category of impact that we're prioritizing. Another area is, I can't think of all the specific, but I mean, there's like so many different ways you can have impact. And what we hear from the entrepreneurs from CalSeed especially is that since it's a very early stage technology, it doesn't always mean that the final product will be like become available to in the market. So I think in terms of innovations that kind of are like more like a piece of a film that goes in an EV battery or something like that, we encourage companies and entrepreneurs to really think about things like hiring locally, having commitments of like saying, oh, we're gonna commit to hiring this percentage of our employees locally. Or another example we offer is to have maybe pilot programs when you're going through the testing phase and developing your product, different iterations of it, have pilot projects in low-income communities. That way you can form partnerships with local community-based groups, but you're also learning about what their needs are as you're developing your product, instead of having already developed something and then later going back and saying, oh wait, this doesn't meet the needs of low-income communities. So, I mean, those are just kind of some examples we offer.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful. And I point out to the group that's on the line here, there'll be another cycle of CalSeed grants coming up next year. And actually the number of points awarded for people who do a good job on the environmental justice, underserved communities dimensions that Parwana has talked about, it's a significant number of points. So it deserves some time thinking out creatively, and Parwana's given us a good idea of the things that could be done in order to win points in that area. And the CalSeed grants, $150,000 initially, a $450,000 follow-up grant for those that are successful out of round one, is not, it's not trivial. And as I've always said, it's a grant. It's not a loan. You don't have to pay it back, and you don't give up a single percentage point of ownership in your company. So it's a good program to get involved with.
Yeah, and if I could just add, so the first stage of the money is 150,000 undiluted dollars. If you get the first stage of the money, then you're eligible to apply for the second part of the grant, which is 400,000 to develop prototypes. Yeah, and so when you're like filling out the applications, we ask about social impact, and the way applications are scored, there's 4 different categories that you're scored on. There's like team, there's readiness, there's innovation, and there's social impact, and they're weighed equally. So people that don't spend a lot of time on the social impact part of the application really kind of, it's a missed opportunity really. So you should take some time to think about it if you're interested in applying for CalSeed or even other public grants that ask about social impact.
Yeah, it's very important, and people need to focus on that. I think it's getting to the point where if you haven't addressed well the social equity component of some of these grant applications, you know you're not going to win. So it's important that we do that. Well, we've come to the end of our session here. I want to thank everybody who's participated in the panel. Round of applause for a great job from our 3 panelists, and want to thank everybody who's joined. I think we had a great discussion here. Let's turn to Thomas to wrap it up. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you in our future Perspectives events, in the Spotlight Pitch night that's coming up. And we've got more meetups coming up. The big topic coming up in the next two is the utility grid of the future, microgrids, and what opportunities they provide. So look forward to having you there. Thomas?
All right. Thank you, Gary. I did want to highlight, we did have a talk with Momentum and a well-respected grant writing group, and one that works with the CEC in actually creating the projects. If you go to our YouTube channel here, you can watch it. And one thing they said is, if you do not have a equity portion of your proposal, you will not win a grant, because they are getting so competitive now. And that means you need to go and connect with groups like Greenlining Institute. You need to look at SMUD's map, and if there's groups in Sacramento that you want to connect with, there's plenty. I know ECOS is here on the call, along with on our board we have the Red, Black, and Green Coalition. So that's very important if you're going to be looking to go after these grants. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. And I want to make sure that we thank our program sponsors, Ernst & Young, Hacker Lab, which Gina Lujan, that Jose mentioned, is the CEO of and runs programs with SMUD through, and Reverend, who helps us make videos. I also got a request from Laura Good from CleanStart to make sure that everyone goes and checks out the Subtle Showcase coming up on October 22nd. You can go in there and hear about the future mobility that's happening, and that includes Arlen Orchard, the past CEO of SMUD, talking about mobility. And if you are curious about more about innovation with SMUD, Startup Sac Happy Hour, that's Gina Lujan, founder of Hacker Lab, where I'm based, which is why I have a face mask on. So go in there, check those out. Thank you for attending. And with that, I'm going to bring an end to our live program. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Particularly to our speakers tonight.